What happened to Germany?
Wir sind das Volk!
Over the course of several decades, Germany has drawn millions of immigrants from less developed parts of Europe. And honestly, it was completely understandable. Germany at the time offered far higher wages and a much more stable kind of employment. But over the past few years, that situation has started to shift. For instance, more Poles left Germany than arrived in 2025, resulting in a net loss of nearly 17,000 people. While it's only one example, and we shouldn't jump to conclusions just yet, it highlights a far larger problem. A country that people spent whole decades moving to in search of a secure future today, more and more often cannot guarantee that future even for its own workers anymore. On May 25, 2026, the audit and consulting firm Ernst & Young published its latest report on the condition of German industry. And at first glance, the report actually contained some good news. In the very first quarter of the year, company revenues rose by 1.7%. It was their very first increase after 10 consecutive quarters of uninterrupted decline. Worse though, companies were still cutting jobs at the same time. In a single year, more than 127,000 positions disappeared from German industry, and since 2019, the total loss has reached around 341.5 thousand. That means 1 in every 17 industrial jobs in the country has been wiped out within 7 years. A few months earlier, a very similar warning had come from the credit agency Credit Reform. Its report showed that the crisis is no longer just a story about the biggest corporations. In 2025, almost 24,000 companies declared insolvency, and the fallout hit around 285,000 workers. The hardest blow landed on the automotive industry, where 1 in every 7 positions is already gone. The metal industry and the textile industry recorded some heavy losses as well. Ernst & Young also warned that weak demand, trouble with exports, and a surplus of unused production capacity could all lead to yet more job cuts and to factory closures, and the announcements coming from the biggest corporations show very clearly that this is not some distant scenario. Volkswagen wants to eliminate more than 35,000 positions in its German plants by the year 2030 and shrink its production capacity by around 734,000 cars every year. ZF Friedrichshafen, which is one of the largest producers of car parts in the world, intends to cut somewhere between 11 and 14,000 people from its workforce. ThyssenKrupp Steel, one of the biggest producers of steel anywhere in Germany, plans to eliminate around 11,000 positions or simply hand them over to companies from the outside. Audi is planning to cut another 7.5 thousand jobs on top of that, and Bosch has announced the elimination of around 13,000 positions. Taken together, the plans of just these 5 companies cover around 80,000 workers, and it is the case of Bosch that shows the real scale of the problem especially well. In September 2025, the company informed that its automotive division is facing an annual cost gap of somewhere around 2.5 billion euros. To close that gap, the firm is cutting back on its spending and on its headcount, above all in its own German plants. In Feuerbach alone, around 3.5 thousand positions are set to disappear, and production at the site in Weiblingen, a plant that currently employs 560 people, is going to be wound down completely.
Wir sehen uns jetzt aufgrund der besonders schwachen Nachfrage in Europa und auch des erhöhten Wettbewerbsdrucks in Europa einfach gezwungen, die Schritte zu gehen, die wir jetzt angekündigt haben.
But behind the company's problems, there is no single bad decision to point to. The European car market has essentially stopped growing altogether at this point. Demand for diesel engine parts keeps falling, and hydrogen technology and the sales of electric car components are simply not growing fast enough to make up for all of the orders that have been lost. The problems of German industry did not start in the factories of Bosch or Volkswagen though. Their roots go all the way back to the very model Germany spent years building its advantage on. For decades, German companies ran on relatively cheap natural gas imported from Russia and turned that gas into expensive products that were then exported all around the world. Cars, machinery, steel, and chemical products mattered most of all. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that whole arrangement fell apart. Gas deliveries from the east were cut back, and Germany had to replace them in a very short time, with far more expensive supplies brought in among others through LNG terminals. The situation got got even more complicated when the very last nuclear power plants in the country were switched off in April 2023. Nuclear plants alone would not have solved every problem of the German economy, of course, but closing them cut off access to a stable source of energy at the exact moment the crisis was at its worst. At the same time, Germany is investing heavily in wind power and in solar. The trouble is that new sources are being built faster than the grids, the energy storage, and the power plants that are able to stabilize the system when the wind does not blow and the sun does not shine. And the costs of that rebuild fall on companies and consumers. In the second half of 2025, the average price of electricity for German industry and business stood at around 19.2 euro cents for every kilowatt hour. That was above the average for the whole of the European Union, which at the time came to around 18.4 euro cents. For a company that makes cars, energy is only one item on a long list of costs. For a steel mill, a chemical plant, or a glass factory, though it can decide whether keeping production running makes any economic sense at all. And that is exactly why the crisis hit the energy-hungry industries the hardest. The output of chemicals, of metals, of glass, and of other basic materials remains clearly below where it stood before the energy crisis hit. BASF is scaling back its operations at its main complex in Ludwigshafen, while ThyssenKrupp keeps on cutting the capacity of its German steel mills. The government is trying to save the most important plants with tax breaks and with subsidized energy prices. That approach may well stop some of the closures, but it creates yet another problem. Only selected companies get the help, while the cost of it all lands squarely on the state budget. And energy is not the only reason behind the layoffs. German firms are also wrestling with very high labor costs, with complicated procedures, with weak demand right across Europe, and with the ever stronger competition coming out of China. For years, China was above all a giant export market for German goods. It bought German cars, German machinery, and German technology. Today it produces more and more of those products entirely on its own, often cheaper and faster. And with that, two pillars of the German model collapsed at the same time. The cheap energy from the East disappeared, and the most important Asian client turned into a direct competitor. Faced with all of this, Berlin decided on a step it had been avoiding for years: a truly massive increase in debt. A special fund worth 500 billion euros is supposed to finance the modernization of energy, rail, roads, and digital infrastructure over the next 12 years. The sum certainly sounds impressive, but it is not going to be spent in one go. The money is meant to flow gradually over 12 years, and its main source will be additional borrowing sitting outside the regular state budget. 100 billion euros will go to the German states and local governments. Another 100 billion is earmarked for the energy transition and for climate protection. The remaining funds are then supposed to finance federal investment. And the list of needs is a long one. Thousands of kilometers of German roads and rail lines are waiting for repairs. Bridges, schools, and public buildings keep getting older and older. The railways struggle with breakdowns and delays, and the digitalization of public administration still sits far behind other developed countries. This is the result of a policy of spending restraint that ran on for many years. Germany kept its level of debt low, but it did so partly at the expense of investment. The state kept saving money while its infrastructure slowly wore down. The fund is supposed to finally break that mechanism. The money is meant to go, among other things, into rail, into roads, power grids, digitalization, hospitals, and schools. That way, the state wants to improve the conditions for doing business and at the same time to boost an economy that struggles to grow. The problem is that announcing a fund is not yet the same as actually starting the investment. In 2025, around 24 billion euros were actually spent from the whole program, which was more than 13 billion less than originally planned. At the end of the year, most of the projects were still stuck at the stage of preparation, of securing permits, or of running tenders. In the very first months of 2026, only 28 out of the 107 planned milestones of the program had actually been reached, and that one number exposes the basic weakness of the German state. Berlin knows how to find the money, but it has a much harder time quickly turning that money into an actual renovated bridge, a new rail line, or a functioning power grid. Standing in the way are elaborate procedures, missing staff and public administration, constant disputes between the federal government and the states, and the very long lead time of investment projects. Doubts are also being raised over whether all of this money will really be additional at all. According to an analysis by the German Economic Institute, a large part of the spending plan for 2025 was simply replacing money that would have been spent from the normal federal budget anyway. In practice, the government can simply shift existing investments into the special fund and then use the freed up resources for completely different purposes. Officially, the money still finances modernization, but the real increase in investment is noticeably smaller than the headline figure of 500 billion euros would suggest. The program can still help the German economy, especially if it speeds up the expansion of the power grids and the transport network, but it will not solve every problem of German industry. A new bridge will not automatically lower labor costs, and a faster railway will not hand Volkswagen back the market share it lost in China. So Germany is trying to buy itself some time here with the largest debt program the country has seen in decades. At the very same time, an ever older society means constantly rising spending on pensions, on healthcare, and on all kinds of social support. Because the problems of the German state do not end with industry and worn-out infrastructure. The pension system is becoming a growing burden too. German society is aging fast. According to the country's own statistical office, around 13.3 million of today's workers will have reached retirement age by the year 2040. That is almost 30% of the country's entire current workforce. And the generation that is stepping in to take their place is much smaller, which means the number of people drawing benefits will keep on growing, while the number of workers actually funding the whole system starts to shrink. Right now, the basic pension contribution in Germany stands at 18.6% of a person's pay, and it is split down the middle between the employee and the employer. Official forecasts say that in 2028, the contribution will rise to 19.8%, and by the end of the following decade, it may even go past 21%. But even all of that is still not the whole story. A commission set up by the government of Chancellor Friedrich Merz has proposed creating a mandatory capital pillar on top of all that. The employer and the employee together would be paying an extra 2% of wages into that pillar. The money would not go straight to today's retirees, though. It would land instead on individual accounts that are then invested out on the capital markets. The whole system would work much like the workplace saving plans that are already known from a number of other countries, and the money collected there would one day be topping up the regular state pension. The reform also assumes a gradual extension of working life itself. The current retirement age, which stands at 67, would after the year 2031 be linked directly to the growth of life expectancy. Under the assumptions that were published, it could rise to around 67.5 years by the year 2041. So German companies are getting a deeply contradictory signal out of all of this. The government wants to keep production in the country, but at the very same time, it keeps pushing labor costs up. That can speed up automation, encourage even further job cuts, and push part of the business out to cheaper countries altogether. The biggest bill of all, though, may well land on younger Germans. They are the ones expected to pay higher contributions, to retire later, and to one day carry the cost of the debt being taken on right now to modernize the country. So it is hardly a surprise that the reform has triggered strong public resistance. In a survey carried out for the broadcaster ARD, almost 2/3 of respondents opposed linking the retirement age to life expectancy. Most did not believe either that the proposed changes would spread the burden fairly across generations. And the discontent does not stop at pensions either. Germans fear losing their jobs, they fear falling living standards, and they fear a state that no longer provides the kind of stability it was famous for over whole decades. In July 2026, just 13% of those surveyed said they were satisfied with the work of Chancellor Merz. At the same time, AfD climbed all the way up to 27% support in the polls and moved ahead of the CDU and CSU by a full 5 percentage points. The rise of AfD is not driven by the state of the economy alone, of course. Migration, security, and the constant infighting inside the government all play their part here. But the industrial crisis and the pension reform both feed the growing conviction that the established parties can simply no longer protect the living standards of ordinary citizens, and the problems fueling this political revolt do not stop at Germany's borders either. One of the most exposed countries here is Poland, a country whose entire industry has remained very tightly linked to German factories for years now. In the first 5 months of 2026, Germany was responsible for a full 26.5% of the whole value of Polish exports. The real problem, however, is the pace at which all of this is changing. Poland's total exports grew by 3.5%, while the sales going to Germany rose by barely 0.6%, so the share of the German market in Polish exports has started to fall. And the automotive industry is the most exposed part of all this. Polish plants produce engines, gearboxes, car seats, tires, wiring harnesses, body parts, and batteries. A large share of those components goes to the factories of Volkswagen, Audi, Mercedes, and their many suppliers. When a German car maker cuts its production by several 100,000 cars, the lost orders do not only hurt the workers over in Wolfsburg or Stuttgart. Factories and transport companies end up getting less work too. too. The very same mechanism can hit the producers of machinery, of metal goods, of furniture, and of chemicals. A slowdown in Germany translates very quickly into fewer orders all across Poland. But the crisis can open up new opportunities for Poland as well. If producing in Germany is getting far too expensive, companies can move part of their operations over to Central Europe, and Poland offers lower labor costs, access to the single market, a well-developed industrial base, and close proximity to German logistics hubs. For a big corporation, that is a far simpler solution than building brand new plants somewhere in Asia. The company keeps producing inside the European Union while cutting its costs and keeping all the supply chains short. The German Infrastructure Fund creates an opening of its own here as well. Modernizing the railways, the energy system, schools, and digital networks will require enormous quantities of cables, IT systems, and transport services. Part of those orders can end up going to Polish companies, so the German program worth 500 billion euros may not only lift demand inside Germany, but also indirectly power Polish exports. None of this will happen automatically though. Poland is competing for all of that new investment with Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania, and it wrestles with problems of its own, from high energy prices through steadily rising wages to a shortage of workers. The ongoing shift to electric cars remains a very real threat as well, simply because many of the Polish plants still produce parts designed exclusively for combustion engines. So the key question is where the production being wound down in Germany will actually end up. If it moves to Poland or to other countries of Central Europe, they can take over some of the plants, some of the investment, and the well-paid jobs. But if the factories simply close down and their output gets replaced by imports from China or from the United States, Polish suppliers will lose right alongside the German ones. Poland can only really benefit from the weakening of German industry if it stops being merely its cheap subcontractor and starts taking over the more advanced stages of production, the research and the technologies of its own. Germany is not the only country in Western Europe though where the model that used to work is now running into ever more serious trouble. A good example here is neighboring France, a country that was for many years seen as one of the economic and political pillars of the European Union. Today, it is wrestling with ever higher levels of debt and with mass protests against one reform after another. And you'll learn a lot more about how exactly France became the most indebted country in the entire European Union in the video on your screen right now. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next one.